he doesn't give a lot of sort of speeches. He's not sort of grandstanding. It's just he acts, with his presence and his sort of ingenuity, which I think is a great thing to pull off in terms of a performance from Idris.
I love the show. Every time I watch it, I am on the edge of my seat, even though I know what's coming. It is so great.
Oh, brilliant. I'm glad you love it. That's so cool. Have you seen it all now? Have you watched it, the whole thing?
Yeah, I watched it a couple times because I watched the Spinners originally when we got them early, and then have been watching it week by week as it comes out still.
Right. Okay, that's cool. I've been doing the same with my family, actually. It's quite surprising. Probably watched it about 100 times, but there's still moments I get sort of like caught up in the intricacy of it all and the energy of it all, and it's like hilarious. It's so funny. It's sort of we've got a family screening of Ep 7 tonight, actually, so it'll be quite cool. Quite looking forward to that.
That's awesome. I love that. Can you talk to me a little bit about collaborating with Idris Elba, both as the lead of the series, but also as a producer?
Yes. What can I tell you? He's a lovely man. He's been wonderful to work with. He came on the project quite early, actually, when we were sort of developing it in its sort of early stages, and we were. It was one of those sort of perfect sort of marriages, really, where we started. The original project as a concept was just like a one-page idea that came from George Kay and Jim Field Smith. So he had this sort of one-page sort of outline of what a story about a plane being hijacked, and this sort of central character sort of outsmarting the hijackers in a kind of slightly ambiguous way. And it was one of those things that you instantaneously get. You see it straight away. And Apple had introduced us to Jim and George and sort of said, look, you guys should work together on this idea because we think it's really cool. And then so we started that process, and it was in the middle of lockdown, when we couldn't physically spend any time with each other, and or definitely not in closed rooms anyway. And so we'd meet in the park and have conversations about the show and walk miles and miles around London parks to do it. And then as it sort of started to garner some shape, Apple sort of facilitated the introduction of Idris to the project because they had a deal with him, Green Door, and said this could be something that he'd be interested in as well. And he read the same thing I did and instantaneously got it and said this could be amazing. And so he came on really early. So it's been a wonderful sort of collaborative sort of experience to kind of go through all of that, get the show into the shape that it was, and then ultimately film it. And it was a great partner.
And then the show has so many great twists. I thought the reveal of why the hijackers were actually doing this was so great. And then that there were actually inside men on the plane. Very cool. What kind of inspired some of those unexpected twists that we get throughout the series?
I think George is the sort of lead writer on the show, and I think he always wanted to ensure that there was a real sort of propulsion to the story, that we kept, the energy of that story going, and the way you sort of, there's a lot of bear traps in a show like this because it's 7 hours, it's real time. If I said to you, right, you're going to spend 7 hours with us on a plane, you'd be like, it could be the dullest thing ever, right? It's sort of arduous in its sort of proposition. But I think he's like, I described George as a bit like a sort of Swiss clockmaker. He's brilliant at putting these sort of intricate elements together that all kind of work and function brilliantly well. And I think one of those elements for the show was this idea that you would sort of shock and surprise at each sort of in each chapter of the story. There'll be something that you didn't foresee and something you didn't expect. And I think that's what sort of makes it so captivating and thrilling, is that, you're with Idris in those moments as well. You're sort of with your protagonist suddenly going, wow, I thought it was this, and now it's something completely different. And there's something quite sort of chess movie about that. I think, all the way through, it's suddenly that a new move comes out of nowhere, and you've got to find a way to deal with it. And it's just great. I mean, it's an amazing element of the story that to sort of keep the momentum of it going in that way, and keep surprising and keep sort of misstep, but in a way that doesn't sort of piss off your audience. In a way that doesn't sort of make them feel silly, or do you know what I mean? It's not a rug pull. It's just a surprise, and a thrilling surprise.
I thought it was great. And then one of the moments I love in the finale is when Sam gets back on the plane. So why was it important to have him have that final confrontation instead of ending it with him negotiating for the landing?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of debate about that part of the story, like how we would end the story, because that often is the way with these things. It's like, how do you end that story, especially with a show that's a closed-ended series? And I think the overall feeling was that we'd been on such an emotional journey with the characters, and then as you've seen in the show, the show actually does get quite emotional towards the end, and you have this terrifying, we call it a clanding, not a crash, not a landing, but something in between. You have this sort of terrifying moment, and I think what it felt like it would be sort of unfinished if Sam's character wasn't sort of faced with the sort of final showdown of Neil's character, because it just sort of feels like it's something that we needed to kind of, because they go on an emotional journey together, and there is obviously a lot of highly charged and negative overtones between their relationship, and it sort of felt like a way of resolving that part of the story whilst also resolving the story of what happens to the passengers on the plane.
I thought it was great. It was definitely kind of that big satisfying moment, so I thought it was so fun.
Yeah, he's got him. It's like he's got. You kind of need that, right? It would have been. Otherwise, it would have been, oh, we've landed and we got off, and then that's it. It's like it was a bit more to it.
Yes, I completely agree. And then what did Idris bring to the role of Sam that wasn't necessarily on the page?
Oh, well, I mean, that sort of speaks for itself, really, I think. His presence is sort of so magnetic, and he's so captivating. I think it's easy to underestimate the challenge of a role like that, because it's so there's huge sort of swathes of that sequences where he's not speaking. It's all written on his face. It's all in the performance of him inhabiting that character, and I think he does an incredible job of, like, you're really with him for so much of that story, aren't you? You really feel his anguish and his doubt, and there's something really I don't know, slightly refreshing about that as well, I think, because it isn't always about what, it's not, he's a hero. It's a bit of a throwback, really. He's a hero that doesn't necessarily have to do a lot of talking. He doesn't give a lot of sort of speeches, he's not sort of grandstanding. It's just, he acts, with his presence and his sort of ingenuity, which I think is a great thing to pull off in terms of a performance from Idris.
Oh, I agree. I was so impressed with how you guys balance these really high stakes, action-packed moments with these very intimate performances. I thought that was one of the coolest things of the show. And then, so this is like obviously a closed series, but I'm curious, would you be interested in kind of continuing this with different heroes in different high stakes situations like this?
Producers always want to do a second season. So it's not, I'm never going to say no to the proposition of that, but that's a question for Apple. You should ask those guys, but we'd definitely be up for another season. Definitely.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. This show is so great. The finale is fantastic. I'm so glad that people are getting to watch it. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really appreciate that. I'm great. I'm glad you did.